Well, thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony in support of H1882. Just to be brief, I know time is limited, I'm a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, just retired a few weeks ago, actually. And in that time of the last 9 years, I've been a very vocal whistleblower advocate, advocating for psychological safety in the workplace, dignity of all workers in the workplace. I'm a survivor of workplace bullying, harassment, discrimination, retaliation, and other unlawful and really just painful trauma. But I'm here today to really state for the record that this bill must be passed. It's overdue for the state of Massachusetts. I have been a federal employee. However, as I've shared my story, from my testimony on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., I also was a former State of the Union Guest of Honor. But as I've shared my story, from a federal perspective, I've had hundreds, if not thousands of people reach out to me from all across the United States, really sharing how my experiences have resonated with their experiences. So what we're really talking about is pretty universal treatment that we workers, whether we're talking about the state or elsewhere, we want fair treatment. We want to be psychologically safe in the workplace. When we are experiencing toxic environments, egregious abuses, and when we file those complaints, we do not want to be retaliated against, we do not want to be harmed, and we want our employers to take our allegations seriously, and we want our employers to be held accountable, and that begins by passing laws such as 1882 to make sure that every worker is treated with dignity and every worker has an opportunity to realize their potential in the workplace. So I thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to my fellow panelists.
Tackling this very important issue, I'm supporting H1882. I'm arguing for psychological safety in the workplace as an umbrella term that covers everything that we've all heard today. I wrote a book, The Bullied Brain. It was published in 2022 in America, and I've been researching for the past 10 years as a PhD in comparative literature, award-winning educator, and whistleblower, and target of workplace bullying, what workplace bullying does to the brain. And what I've learned is that our laws are very out of date with what the science knows. We have extensive, peer-reviewed, replicated science over the course of the last 20 years that shows that all forms of bullying and abuse, they do not need to touch the body. All forms can do significant neurological scarring to the brain. So when you hear people talking and when they start to cry and when they express their trauma and they say their health is being damaged, what we don't know is that an EEG would show us very quickly, an assessment would show us very quickly that the damage that's being done to their brains at the hands of bullying behaviors is why they are so unwell and why they are losing so much in their lives. So my big plea is for legal experts and government experts and lawmakers, policy writers to get up to speed on the neuroscience. I documented it extensively in the book. One of the world's leading neuroscientists, Dr. Michael Merzenich, said that the bullied brain is the most completely, thoroughly scientific treatment of the subject on planet Earth. And that's just me, a layperson, not a scientist, gathering the information and trying to share it with the public and get people educated. Psychological abuse is as damaging as physical abuse. And if the law requires we must have steel-toed boots and we must worry about the heat and we need to wear helmets, then we need to know about brain damage and what bullying does to the brain. Thank you so much.
My name is Gretchen Carlson. On July 6, 2016, I jumped off the cliff and decided to sue my boss, the former CEO and chairman of Fox News, Roger Ailes, for sexual harassment. I basically had no idea what was going to happen to me the next moment, the next day, the next week. There was no safety net underneath me at all. My decision to speak out came to pass because a journalism career I had built for more than 30 years after rising to the top of my profession, all of it was taken away from me, and it was not my choice. I decided finally, if I don't stand up and tell the truth, who will? I am testifying today in support of Massachusetts Bill H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, which aims to hold employers accountable for psychological abuse and to expand protections for both those in and not in protected classes. Toxic workplaces are a systemic problem rooted in employers' lack of accountability and transparency. What I learned from my experience at Fox is that companies misuse their power over employees, allowing toxic workplace environments to occur through the use of forced arbitration and NDAs. Through these mechanisms, companies silence you, and most people have no idea they have signed these agreements on their first day of work. Non-disclosure agreements were originally intended to protect proprietary company information, but NDAs have become so much more expansive to include anything that happens to you at work. You can't talk about it. That means the behavior I was experiencing, I couldn't warn other people about. I could not go to any other women and ask if the same thing was happening to them because that would have violated the NDA. Forced arbitration is the other weapon that employers use to cover up toxic behavior. When a forced arbitration clause is in your contract, you are basically signing away your Seventh Amendment right to a jury. We have founded a nonprofit organization, Lift Our Voices, to eradicate these silencing mechanisms in the workplace, and so every single worker feels safe, respected, and included. I ask that Massachusetts legislatures, I ask that you support this legislation, which will take significant steps towards holding employers accountable for the work environment and restore greater balance and equity for workers in your state.
Good afternoon, Chair Jolen, Vice Chair Diggs, and committee members. My name is Vicki Cordan. I am testifying in support of 1882. I want to see employers held accountable. In 2018, I walked away from my job as a Massachusetts state employee. The only thing I knew that morning was that I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't even know what anymore was. I'd gone to HR about a workplace bully. I was told an investigation would take place. My work environment worsened, the bully's behavior escalated, months went by in silence. My health declined in sync. The bully wasn't the only one abusing me. Fraud experts refer to it as a cloak of authority. The perpetrators were sitting in an administrative office building on a college campus cashing six-figure paychecks. It never crossed my mind the protocol was fraudulent, nor did I suspect they would conspire against me. While I was waiting for resolve, they were waiting for me to snap. Snapping under stress is as predictable as the sun coming up. No fingerprints, no black and blues, just human carnage. They turned a willful blind eye and a willful deaf ear. See no evil, hear no evil. Employers cannot be held liable for issues of which they have no knowledge. Today I am here to speak about that evil. Bullying and mobbing are premeditated, full-swing operations of interpersonal abuse that researchers refer to as processes of dehumanization and traumatization. Employees harming employees under the radar of any viable form of accountability. I succumbed to the injuries, most notably a brain injury. If I had 3 years to testify, I could never explain the horror I felt when I realized the premeditation, and later that my FMLA paperwork had been contrived to infer that I was mentally ill should I dare speak out. They got away with it all, multiple crimes and violations of basic human rights. If they were sitting behind bars, perhaps I would have been better able to discern. Surely that is where they belong. Please move H1882 forward and stop the slaughter of innocent employees in Massachusetts workplaces.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. I. David Daniels. I'm president and CEO of ID2 Solutions, and I'm host of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I support Bill H. 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I'm asking the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to do something that it's done before by taking the lead in focusing on the health and safety of workers as it did in 1887 when it passed the nation's first workplace safety legislation in the form of a factory inspection law. In this case, Bill H. 1882 would ensure that every worker has the right to a psychologically safe work environment. My research has defined a psychosocial hazard as a workplace factor perceived or experienced as a threat to the person exposed. In 2021, the International Organization for Standardization released ISO 45003, which is a global standard that provides guidelines for managing psychosocial risks in the workplace. The standard clearly identifies bullying as a psychosocial hazard. Section 5A1 of the OSH Act of 1970, or the General Duty Clause, requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. It's difficult to argue that most, if not all, physical harm does not arise first from psychological harm. In fact, 30 countries around the world, including Canada, Mexico, Australia, and the UK, have declared through national standards and legislation that it's just as essential to address psychosocial hazards as it is to address physical ones. Bill H. 1882 would be the first state-level legislation focused on psychological safety in the United States. Passage of this legislation, passage of legislation of this nature could position the Commonwealth as the most psychologically safe place in the nation to work. It would also prepare workplaces to receive students whose expectations of psychological safety is already extremely high. This is due to the reality that K-12 schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have the lowest rate of bullying in the United States.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Dawn Johnson, and I'm an assistant professor at the College of St. Scholastica and the author of a book on workplace bullying. I support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, because I want to see employers held accountable for workplace abuse. I was just 23 and a research assistant at a large public university working on a federally funded research project when I was targeted by my supervisor with daily verbal abuse. When I reported the behavior to the next level of leadership and to the department chair, they both defended my supervisor. When I had no choice but to leave my assistantship early, the school slapped me with a bill for thousands of dollars, claiming I had not met the obligation to my assistantship. They thought I would just go away. I didn't. The department chair fabricated a plan to pay me for the final weeks of my assistantship in the hopes the student accounts would reverse my bill. The department chair insisted that they could not give me the check on campus. Instead, we met in a gas station parking lot on the edge of town. Although the department chair stated that the check was not a payoff, the university got what it wanted. I left quietly. Bullying does not occur in a vacuum. It is supported by the structures or lack of structure and accountability in an organization. Abusive cultures do not just happen. They are created over time by the choices that the organization makes. Who to promote, what policies are created and enforced, and how the company handles reports of abuse. My supervisor's abusive behavior was a known pattern that had been going on for years, with at least one research assistant being driven out each year. Because of the abuse, my educational goals were derailed, my mental and physical health suffered, and I struggled with my confidence and ability to trust in the workplace. Organizations are responsible for sustaining and perpetuating abuse. It's time they protected their employees. Please support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Thank you.
Thank you, chairs, vice chair, and committee members. My name is Kim Williams. I am an HR executive, and I'm here in support of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, House Bill 1882. I'm here because of my direct experience navigating workplace abuse claims on behalf of employers, and as someone who has also experienced abuse at work from a previous employer. Like many others, I've endured a work environment filled with acts of deliberate intimidation, verbal abuse, and direct threats to my job and my ability to support my child. But unlike many others, I worked in HR, and I had a pretty good grasp of the rules. Yet in spite of that, I could not get anyone inside of my organization to help me. From board members to legal counsel, everyone knew there was a problem. Nobody wanted to act because it was a very powerful bully. In one particular instance, I asked for an independent outside investigation, and after much persistence, they opened one. At its conclusion, the investigator sustained allegations of abuse towards me, but also determined that no violation of EEO policy had occurred. In short, nothing unlawful had happened, and so no remedial action was required, and the abuse continued unabated. There are millions of people that are locked in a system where those who write the rules write them differently for themselves. This two-class system causes great harm, and years of firing low-ranking individuals who break rules while hiring executive coaches for the top brass hasn't helped. Only accountability can do that. Only you can do that. I want to thank you again for hearing today's testimony and the many requests to see the basic human dignity in us all. To me, this event is of enormous consequence to myself, my family, and our country. And it is not lost on me that we are fittingly, I suppose, having this discussion from the cradle of liberty and a state of many firsts. Please be the first to make this a law. Please move this bill forward.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Drinka, and I'm an organizational psychologist, and my doctoral research examined the conditions required for team high performance, with psychological safety being a critical tenet of innovation. I support this legislation because it's time employers are held accountable for creating and maintaining psychologically unsafe work environments. Toxic workplaces violate the fundamental human rights of employees and have countless negative impacts, such as low performance. Decades of research on human performance has shown that psychological safety is a requirement for innovative and high-performing teams. These are the teams that can tackle pressing societal issues and set Massachusetts and the rest of the country apart as a beacon of innovation around the world. However, the sad reality is that only 20% of teams are considered high performing, showing us the significant opportunity we have to increase psychological safety in organizations. Few organizations have the expressed intent to create conditions that foster poorly performing teams. However, in failing to ensure psychologically safe impact on employees, teams and organizations foster conditions for poor performance. Therefore, it's crucial that we hold employers accountable for impact, not intent. We are at a pivotal moment in history, facing pressing and urgent problems that demand innovative solutions. While some organizations may hesitate due to potential legal implications, it is undeniably in their best interest to foster psychologically safe work environments. By doing so, organizations can capitalize on their missions and keep Massachusetts and the rest of the country at the forefront of innovation worldwide. In conclusion, I urge you to support H1 882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, and take a stand against workplace abuse. Let us hold employers accountable and ensure that every employee's basic human rights are respected and protected, and facilitate experiences for teams and organizations to reach peak performance. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Amy Ellington. I support the Workplace Psychological Safety Act because it's the tool that human resources professionals need in order to take action against the bullies that are destroying the full potential of the companies and the employees who work for them for the inside out. As a professional in human resources with over 20 years of progressive experience, I've seen it all. It's a known fact that bullies love to attack top performers, arguably one of a company's greatest resources. So why aren't we doing more to stop this? These bullies systematically destroy the full potential of the companies and the employees who work for them, and they do it from the inside out. I say from the inside out because workplace bullies attack the psyche of their victims. On a personal note, being part of this testimony is very important for my own recovery. Instead of post-traumatic stress disorder, I choose to embrace post-traumatic growth. We don't see bruises, but the scars run deep beneath the flesh and the blood that we all share for those of us lucky enough to survive. Sadly, workplace psychological abuse leads to suicidal ideation and suicide, and I share this from my own personal experience. Human resources professionals don't get into the field with a mind to enable workplace psychological abuse, but that's frequently what happens. Terrifying to think I thought of leaving this life prematurely just to stop the pain I endured as a victim. I held 2 jobs for 8 years. Unknowingly, I took a front row seat to what it takes, and I'm trying to tighten up my testimony here. Anyway, a pattern began to emerge. A small number of people are responsible for the majority of the problem. Today, we have the opportunity as a group collectively to make history. And thank you for the opportunity to share my voice. As you can hear, I am under the weather, but I'm committed to seeing our progress. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Nicole Deay. I have a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology, and I studied the impact of chronic and covert traumatic experiences in the workplace. Toxic work environments are bad for people's health. They're associated with higher levels of stress, unhealthy behavior, mental and physical health consequences, and burnout. In 2008, toxic workplaces cost organizations $16 billion in related healthcare costs, or almost $23 billion today. It's estimated that more than 120,000 deaths per year and approximately 5 to 8% of annual healthcare costs are associated with and may be attributable to how U.S. companies manage their workforce. The McKinsey Health Institute studied toxic work environments and found that they were the single largest predictor of negative employee outcomes such as burnout, depression, psychological distress, anxiety, and predicted more than 2 times the global variance of all positive practices combined. Specifically, they predicted 73% of turnover. Employees in these situations leave their jobs to prioritize their health without another source of income, which results in increased taxpayer expenses for things like TAMP, SNAP, and Medicare. These health consequences need to be addressed since they reduce worker productivity while harming the U.S. economy and social support systems. Toxic work environments also lead to negative consequences for American children. A toxic environment can leave parents feeling depleted and unable to engage in behaviors that require sustained effort like parenting. Parents with high levels of burnout tend to spend more time being sedentary when they return home, rather than spending time on activity with their kids. These environments can cause parents to be violent or neglectful towards their children, even when these parents are philosophically opposed to those behaviors. These work-induced adverse childhood experiences, which are the single largest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today, are associated with chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance abuse later in life. For California alone, ACEs cost $112.5 billion a year. It's clear that toxic environments impact employees, children, and there's a fiscal and social responsibility to reduce that harm in American workplaces.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Susan Bond, and I am a faculty member at the University of South Carolina, responsible for teaching disability law and education. I was also responsible for the past 5 years for investigating bullying and unprofessional conduct at my institution. For too long, bullies have been permitted to get away with their behavior because employers fail to stand up to bullies, particularly bullies who have power, status, superstardom, or privilege. While I was pregnant, I suffered endless abuse from my doctoral advisor. This is especially surprising because I had just graduated from law school. He was also my employer. When my unborn child stopped thriving and my doctor thought maybe I should file a sexual harassment claim against my professor, I knew that he would retaliate against me and ruin my entire career, which laid ahead of me. I also lacked faith in the system because my abuser was a superstar. He was very highly regarded at the institution, and he also was very clever and inflicted all of his worst harm and abuse when we were alone. At the end of the day, my only option was to take a personal leave because I feared for my child who had stopped thriving. That means both he and I, during my pregnancy, were losing weight instead of gaining weight. I had to take a leave of absence, and I had to walk away from my research stream at that point and my studies. I returned later under another advisor, but had to start from scratch with all of my research. I am here today because I believe that we cannot sit by as passive observers. We have an opportunity with this legislation to adopt policies that include the appropriate and reasonable guidelines to start taking action. For example, employment policies, and because I've seen this firsthand, that's the faculty civility advocate, employment policies need to have effective deterrence and response, immediate and smooth response to the work environments and abuse. They have to have clear and fair procedures, timely pathways, and accountability for the policy violators. Thank you so much for your consideration of this legislation. We ask you to stand up for those who no longer have a voice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Jolen, Vice Chair Diggs. My name is Anthony Landre. I'm Political Director of SEIU 888. Before that, I was a 21-year dispatcher with the Boston Police Department. In that role, I helped found the Crisis Intervention Team for 911 First Responders in the Commonwealth, and I now sit on the Board of Directors for the Mass State Peer Support Network. In that role, one would think that the emergency calls would be at the forefront of the psychological safety of these workers, but what I found in a very short period of time, that it actually was the administrative betrayal of the workplaces that these workers worked in, which is why I am here to support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Our union also represents the workers at the Holyoke and Chelsea Soldiers' Homes. I think that we don't need to do too far of a look back to see what occurred in those workplaces in 2020 and going forward. Why is it that we needed to have whistleblower protection for these employees to do the right thing to save the lives of their coworkers and for their other veterans that were at the soldiers' homes? We also have our 911 employees that we represent. We have a member of our crisis team who was seeking intervention for herself. She was exposed to a traumatic incident outside of work, at which point one of the supervisors did not appreciate the fact that she was taking the time to get medical and clinical care at which point he went around the workplace floor asking if she truly was getting psychological help. This is not an extreme circumstance. I heard that word used earlier when someone else was giving testimony. What happens is when the can gets kicked down the road enough, the extreme circumstances become the norm, which is why whistleblower protection is at the forefront right now when anyone needs to advocate for themselves or have the right thing done in their workplace. We need to take a long look at how our workplaces treat our employees, and H1882 is a critical component in rectifying those situations. Thank you all for your time today.
And thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. S.L. Young. I am an outspoken advocate about the negative and consequential impacts of workplace abuse. This issue is personal to me, as I nearly ended my life in March 2014 after leaving several leadership positions after being asked to do things that were unethical, abusive behavior, verbal and physical, and actions that violated my personal rights. I support Bill H1882, which is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. This bill is important as it will hold employers accountable for workplace abuse, which, if unresolved, leads to psychological unsafe work environments that violate human rights. The enactment of this bill will ensure that employees won't need to tolerate mental and emotional abuses just because the scars aren't visible. It isn't acceptable in any workplace to physically abuse anyone. If a physical attack occurred, then it would be immediately addressed and the initiator would be dealt with accordingly. However, if someone was mentally and emotionally abused someone, then these personal violations aren't always addressed or taken seriously. Instead, the focus of the psychological abuse is to instruct the target to toughen up or develop thick skin. These aren't useful comments, as it doesn't address underlying issues, which is that someone is being violated, actions aren't being taken to address a bona fide concern, and it's a dismissal of someone's communicated concerns that their rights are being violated. Oftentimes, targets of workplace attacks don't report incidents due to fears of retaliation, loss of assignments, minimized opportunities for advancement, and terminations. These are strong motivators and significant factors to remain silent, especially if someone is concerned about their ability to take care of themselves or a loved one. If there aren't meaningful protections that provide actionable remedies to hold abusers accountable for their actions, then there aren't punitive enforcements to remedy unnecessary attacks. Therefore, please don't allow these types of behaviors to continue unguarded. Instead, please take meaningful action to become a pioneer in the effort to build inclusive, protected, and emotionally safe work environments by enacting the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, Bill H1882. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Maher Nassar. I'm the principal at the Nassar Law Group, an employment discrimination law firm which practices in New York and New Jersey. I'm here in support of passing the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, known as H1882, because no one should be losing their life because of their workplace, and no one should be getting mentally ill due to their workplace. We can disagree on how we create those effective legislative safeguards, but we cannot disagree that the psychological safety of people is a paramount responsibility of an employer to cater to a safe workplace. The environment that they nurture and enable must not be permitted to harm people. As an employment lawyer, I've spoken to countless people who have experienced systematic abuse, but did not fall into a protected category. Being unable to help them for accountability for the harm they experienced weighed heavily on me, as I continued to refuse them as clients because the law did not protect them. The more I learned and understood that these experiences were unfair, unjust, unacceptable, inhumane, I had no choice to say that their experiences were legal under the law. The U.S. Surgeon General's report last year laid out how and why toxic workplaces are causing mental health issues. One of the 5 core components of a healthy workplace is protection from harm. The Surgeon General's report specifically calls for the protection against psychological harm. According to the Workplace Bullying Institute, nearly 1/3 of Americans are bullied at work. You'd think that with remote working options since the pandemic, things would be better, but no. Nearly 45% of remote workers experience bullying. I often see concerns regarding costs associated with enacting legislation, especially the potential for case backlogs in an already burdened judicial system. But I ask, what is the cost that we are already paying? Has anyone looked into the cost on our society of the mental illness that is being cultivated and how that affects our future generations? The truth is that by enacting laws to provide accountability for psychological harm, we will witness more preventative measures by employers to stop such treatment for those circumstances that do not get adequately addressed. There must be accountability that creates deterrence. Today, Massachusetts has an opportunity to become the first state to outlaw psychological abuse within the workplace and to create mechanisms for accountability. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Ravosa. I'm a local attorney in private practice, and I'm also a volunteer attorney for the Massachusetts Debt Relief Foundation, a pro bono organization that handles financial counseling and bankruptcies free of charge for residents of the Commonwealth. I support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. The critical issue is employee exploitation and lack of employer accountability. Consistent with sexual harassment law, intent and harm to a person's health should not be required in order to prevail with their actionable legal claims in a court of law or at another tribunal, such as the MCAD, where I regularly represent women, often single mothers. We have 6 offices, and over my 26 years as a practicing attorney in Massachusetts, in our offices in Boston, Worcester, Natick, Springfield, Hyannis, and Brockton, I have met with, counseled, and represented thousands of women, many of them single mothers. And in my experience, too many women, and one is too many women put up with and are forced to tolerate bullying in the workplace because, as my brother counsel said, there is no adequate remedy if it doesn't fall within the purview of 151B under the MCAD, and if the client doesn't want to sit through a 2 to 3 year haul through Superior Court, they're left without a remedy. And why do they tolerate it? I'll give you a few reasons. Because the rent is past due, because the electricity shut off, because the oil tank is empty, because the car payment is late, because there are young mouths to feed at home, or because there are aging parents to care for. Those are the real people that I sit across from, like I'm sitting across from you today, and I hear their stories. And over 26 years, that is what I'm putting before you for your consideration. There are many reasons why women tolerate bullying in the workplace, as there are women who experience it. This is why holding employers liable for their conduct makes sense. It's time to evolve and elevate our collective standards in behavior in the workplace in this Commonwealth. Thank you for your consideration.
Hello, Representatives. I support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I want to see employers held accountable for workplace abuse. Toxic, psychologically unsafe work environments violate human rights. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. I would first like to thank Representatives Giannino and Doherty for introducing this bill. My name is Dr. Jolen Nelson. I am a researcher in industrial and organizational psychology. I am addressing a societal concern that demands attention and decisive action: workplace psychological abuse and bullying. The unthinkable incidents of a workplace mass shooting unfolding this year on January 23rd in California and last November at a Walmart superstore in Virginia have shaken us to our core. The deaths of 14 and the injury of 5 underscore the consequences of unchecked organizational accountability for workers' psychological safety. These tragedies find a commonality: claiming of mocking, non-protective class harassment, and unrealistic work assignments, signifying that workplace psychological abuse is not only an organizational issue, but a societal concern with far-reaching implications. It threatens the well-being of individuals, the stability of our workplaces, and the safeties of our communities. Over the past decade, we have witnessed 18 workplace mass shootings. A third were subjected to relentless humiliation, harassment, and unmanageable workloads. The factors the shooters claim played a role in pushing them to the brink. The statistics are sobering. Victims of this tragic event faced a staggering 49% fatality rate. This is a testament to the intensity of the targeted nature of these attacks. Equally alarming is a recent surge of incidents. 83% of mass shootings have occurred since 2021. This is a signal of a distressing trend that demands immediate intervention. The common denominator among these shooters is their profound anger and feelings of hopelessness fueled by their experience of psychological abuse at work. Our moral responsibility is to protect society from future mass shootings and violence. Bill 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, safeguards the psychologically well-being of our workforce. It provides accountability to organizations that do not act to protect workers from psychological abuse. In conclusion, I stand up as a voice for those suffering from psychological abuse in the shadows. I call upon you to act decisively in confronting this crisis. Do not allow more lives to be shattered by the devastating consequences of psychological abuse. With your support of 1882, you usher in a new era of workplace dignity and safety. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
I support H 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I want to see employers held accountable for workplace abuse. Toxic, psychologically unsafe work environments violate human rights. I'm Jimmy Okubanjo. I'm an operational excellence expert with decades of expertise leading transformation programs and empowering executives in multiple countries in a wide range of industries, and I'm also a filmmaker. For some of us, going to work has been like going into a leopard's cage, day in and out. And the advice that we often get focuses on the victims and how we should be more resilient, toughen up, figure out how to make them like you, and just get back into that cage. It is people of color, particularly women of color, who are affected the most. According to a study in Forbes, 1 in 3 professional women of color are ready to leave the workplace next year. The Oxford University Press suggests that Black women who face racial discrimination at work are nearly 3 times more likely to experience high levels of psychological despair compared to women who don't report that experience. One day, senior leader told me that they could have hired a white man to do my job. I was devastated, tired, and humiliated. I'd never stuck my hands in a cage to a wild leopard, but I had been repeatedly been verbally abused, sexually harassed, physically threatened at work. I learned to suppress who I was because I was constantly told I sounded too American, too Black, and too much. So I directed and produced a documentary movie called Arise Firebird. It tells the stories of 3 seasoned women of color and what they went through in the workplace in terms of toxic work. One of the key things we found is that suicide ideation is a key part, and that's my top, a key part in coping with workplace abuse and workplace trauma. Not addressing these issues through the law minimizes and dismisses the pain of the victims. And finally, it sends a clear message to targets that it's okay to mistreat people like me. Thank you very much for your time.
Chair Jolen, Vice Chair Diggs, and committee members. My name is Deb FY. I co-founded End Workplace Abuse, and I'm testifying in support of H 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Anti-discrimination law is not enough to help targets of workplace abuse, and yet workplace abuse has a discriminatory impact on women and people of color. Because we're in a system of positive and negative stereotypes that translate into privileges and oppressions. So these stereotypes dictate who controls the narrative through closed-door conversations and subjective performance reviews versus who internalizes these narratives as trauma, wondering if they're the problem and feeling less than, fearful, and ashamed. They dictate who can speak up knowing they'll be given weight and respect without fear of retaliation or minimization, who can minimize others to maintain their power, who can easily find acceptance in the power groups because they look like them, versus who fears speaking up because they know they'll be gaslit or minimized, or who sees coworkers who look like them rendered invisible, easy to ignore, and outnumbered when they speak up. Those in power designed this system to maintain their power. It's not a fluke that CEO pay increased by almost 1,500% since 1978, nearly 400 times as much as a typical worker, while some multi-billion-dollar companies sign their workers up for social service benefits, not livable wages. They don't care if they psychologically abuse workers to the point of choosing between their health and a paycheck. They know they have way more resources to battle those who don't blindly obey. Nearly 60 years later, anti-discrimination law hasn't done its job of disrupting the status quo. White men designed it that way to still occupy the vast majority of power positions in the US workforce today. The early days required proof of impact, but as it made progress, courts required proof of intent, a near impossible threshold.
Good afternoon, chairs and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Morteza Mamudi, an associate professor at Michigan State University. I founded the Academic Parity Movement, an organization that fights bullying, discrimination, and harassment. I also research and write on these issues. I would like to testify in support of H 1882, and I would like to see employers held accountable for psychological unsafe work environments. Institutions routinely manipulate internal complaint processes. Only current students and scholars can file, but not a recently graduate international students whose PI exploited their visa status and abusively overworked them. Or informal resolutions is first required. Then authorities attempt in-person intimidation because they can later invent something to counterbalance the target's recollection. Institutions also find any opportunity to minimize or dismiss written complaints, to claim ignorance and avoid reporting responsibilities. Multiple divisional processes and multiple authorities also help create plausible deniability. Similarly, retention policies quickly empty files by design and do not record who saw what when. All of these institutional lack of support to targets make them and the people of the circle of their influences vulnerable to a wide range of side effects, including psychological disorders, and may last for decades. Improvement like basically opening the reports of complaints to all and basically recording them will increase transparency and accountability and will encourage behavior matching the professional standards. If you need more information, I'm happy to refer you to relevant research and media coverage. I strongly encourage you to use your regulatory authorities to address this compliance gap as much as possible. Thank you for your time.
My name is Liz LeClaire. I'm coming to you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. And I am representing Dr. Julie McFarland, who unfortunately is not well enough to join us today. Dr. McFarland and Zelda Pippins are the co-founder of Can't Buy My Silence, an international campaign to ban the misuse of non-disclosure agreements in the case of harassment, abuse, and other forms of workplace abuse. And I'm here to speak in support of Bill H1882 today. I just want to say I want to give my utmost respect and thanks to everyone that's testified today. As a white cisgendered woman with tremendous privilege, I recognize that I am coming to you and speaking about my own abuse, but acknowledge and recognize the abuse that people with disabilities, women of color, people of color, and 2S LGBTQ individuals experience at work every day. What can I say that's not already been said by most of the people who have testified? I think that it is very evident today from all the testimony that this bill is incredibly important. We cannot rely on employers and the system to protect people if the legislation is not in place to be enforced. I want to just say that I think that while we currently legislate and regulate workplace safety in relation to physical safety, psychological safety is incredibly important. The damage done, you can see today from a lot of the testimony how hard this is for people to talk about. And one of the things I just want to highlight that if nothing else, if people are looking for the economic case here to be made, is you're looking at a number of women who are color who are being excluded from participating in the workforce and in the economy. And I think that there is a tremendous responsibility on the part of employers, legislatures, and the government of the United States and Massachusetts to pass this bill. I'm grateful for you letting me join us today, and I want to give my love and solidarity to others who participated on this call. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rowena Chu. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Hi, my name is Rowena Chu. I'm speaking in support of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, H1882. When I was 24 in 1998, I was working for Harvey Weinstein at Miramax Films. was assaulted at the Venice Film Festival, and then afterwards forced to sign an egregious non-disclosure agreement along with my fellow assistant, Zelda Perkins. Our story has appeared in a book, in a movie, both entitled She Said. I'm here today to talk about the effect of our story, both on us personally, but also globally on both the film and entertainment space, but also on the hundreds and thousands of other survivors that I've spoken to from other industries since I have gone public with my story in 2019. Our story was kept secret for 20 years, thanks to the NDA that prevented us from talking about any of the psychological impact of what had happened. Not only the original sexual assault that took place in a hotel room, but also the further assault that took place when our NDA was signed. We were forced into accepting a settlement that kept us silent about what happened for the rest of our lives. A list was kept of our friends and family who knew about the sexual assault so that they also could not speak about it. The NDA prevented us from seeking redress from other lawyers who might advise us on the legality of the NDA we signed, from doctors and other medical professionals that might give us some support, and from therapists. I think our NDA is a true example of how psychological safety is desperately important, and I would like to see it elevated to the same level as physical safety, as this bill, H1882, attempts to do. Since I went public with my story a few years ago, our story has been so much in the media that I have had access to fellow survivors across a number of different industries, not just entertainment and media, but also politics, law, the tech industry. And I think one thing in common with workers that I've spoken to in all of these industries is that they struggle with psychological safety, and we don't have a law that protects us and enables us to go forward and have a legal basis on which to make complaints against those who are much more powerful than us. I would ask you to create history and enshrine this law on this day, the World Mental Health Day, as a way of signaling to other people in other communities that they can also fight for similar laws to be passed in their districts. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Andoa Newton. I'm an attorney and former CPA with over 20 years professional experience and degrees from Georgetown, Cornell Law, and the Sorbonne. My profile may not fit the image of someone treated inhumanely and severely injured by workplace psychological abuse. But none of my achievements has protected me from Louis Vuitton's retaliation, dehumanization, degradation, and psychological injury. Louis Vuitton's parent company, which owns Dior, Fendi, Rihanna's Fenty, and 70 more brands, hired me in 2014 as in-house counsel in New York. My boss, the general counsel, gave me glowing, flawless reviews. Andoa reflects the highest degree of honesty and ethics in all she does. They soon promoted me to vice president. But Louis Vuitton's director of operations, part of the C-suite's inner circle, was sexually harassing me and ultimately assaulted me. My repeated rebuffs had no effect. You'd think that reporting it would stop it, but the opposite was true. Louis Vuitton ignored my reports and refused to stop the harassment. They instructed me to confront the perp, despite my reluctance, then investigated and punished me for following their instructions. They called his misconduct mere flirtation and blamed me for, quote, misunderstanding French culture, even though we are both American, and disregarded a colleague's testimony who had confronted the perp. My boss said, there are certain things we have to put up with in the workplace. Louis Vuitton even suggested that I should apologize to the man who sexually harassed and assaulted me. At my insistence, they reluctantly hired an outside investigator, but she gaslit me, threatened my job, suggested I should be flattered by the harassment, and said I'd be called a troublemaker and a son of a bitch. Louis Vuitton excluded from the final report the internal restraining order she'd initially proposed. Before they even finished the investigation, Louis Vuitton publicly promoted the perp, which emboldened him to harass me more frequently. They employed him for 2 more years, endangering others too. They lowered my evaluations, added negative comments, reduced my comp increases, excluded me from projects and events, and warned that they'd be, quote, keeping an eye on me. When I sought accountability under state law and company policy, Louis Vuitton threatened my attorneys. They jeopardized my career, livelihood, and life by publicly disclosing my home address and salary, seeking sanctions against me personally and hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees from me. The CEO emailed all employees, basically calling me a liar, inciting them to ostracize and isolate me, misstating Louis Vuitton's knowledge, and denying and mischaracterizing facts. Louis Vuitton repeated similar lies to the press and the court. After being hospitalized twice in 1 year, forced to take unpaid medical leave the following year, and diagnosed with PTSD, and having my case forced into arbitration, Louis Vuitton ramped up their relentless, psychologically abusive attacks to devastating levels, ultimately hiring a black general counsel to fire me in a manner intended to publicly humiliate, demean, and punish me, ending my livelihood and possibly my career, and trying to destroy me financially. Please pass H 1882 to protect others from the types of psychological abuse that Louis Vuitton has inflicted upon me. Thank you.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. My name is Lilia F. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm here to testify in support of H 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. As a workers' rights organizer, I advocate to see employers held accountable for workplace abuse. As an immigrant worker, I advocate to end the toxic, psychologically unsafe work environment. As a Massachusetts resident, I want to fight against all human rights violations, including bullying and mobbing. My name is Lilia F, and I have been worked as a workers' rights organizer at the Brazilian Lunis Group for almost 10 years. Every week, workers have reached out asking for help based on the very toxic workplace environment. Workers have been called and verbally insulted by the employers daily. Today is the World Mental Health Day, and even though there are different initiatives to increase awareness about mental illness prevention, many workers have been facing anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts based on the reality of unsafe workplace conditions. Vulnerable workers such as immigrants and undocumented workers are the most unprotected in terms of workplace violations such as wage theft, sexual harassment, discrimination, and psychological abuse. As an example, there are workers who have been called stupid, disabled, crazy, fat, and have been asked if they have dementia, neurological disability, or mental illness. There are workers who have been hiding their personal issues and even physical problems based on the fear of having their privacy used against them by their employers. There are so many immigrant workers who get depressed after working hard to provide for their families, knowing that there is no legal protection against psychological abuse at the workplace. The same workers are living in fear of being retaliated against if they decided to say something back to their employers after being yelled and ashamed in front of their colleagues and the strangers. Workers are called sick because they are so overwhelmed, not only because they are victims of verbal and mental abuse, but also because they see their co-workers being called by bad names by their managers, supervisors, and employers. Also,
Thank you.
there's a lack of professional availability. And I'm asking to pass the H 1882 Workplace Psychological Safety to expand the access of labor protection for the workers in Commonwealth. Thank you so much.
Passing Bill H 1882, the Psychological Safety at Work Act, will give Massachusetts workers needed protection from abusive management practices. I'm Matt Packness, a published author and management consultant with over 25 years of experience helping global and Massachusetts clients, including Boston Scientific, Fidelity Investments, EMC, Dell Technologies, and Harvard University. From 1991 to 2016, the practice flourished. Participants often shared stories of repeated, demeaning, belittling, abusive, and violent workplace abuse. Decent managers helped me correct these problems, sans retaliation. In toxic organizations, whistleblowers experience retribution, become targets, or are fired for fabricated errors or false claims of underperformance. Often the best employees are bullying targets. They trigger bullies who fear being viewed in comparison as incompetent frauds. Bullied adults cry, break down, are terminated, or leave on their own. Some bullying cases lead to death by suicide. Bullying organizations are rife with turnover, vandalism, violence, absenteeism, poor productivity, and ill will. Bullies will often use the court system to file questionable lawsuits to harm their targets. Senior executives are aware of all respective bullying. Healthy organizations support workplace psychological safety legislation. In June of 2017, publisher Post Hill Press contacted with me to author Successful Leaders Aren't Bullies. Simon & Schuster released and distributed the book in September of 2018. It sold out around the globe. My book outlines best practices in identifying, addressing, preventing, and transcending workplace bullying. U.S. workers have constitutional rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet over 72% of the people working in the United States claim to have experienced or witnessed workplace bullying. A government's top priority is protecting its citizens. Bullying behaviors undermine this and violate our constitutional rights. Respective NDAs shield bullying behaviors and put citizens in danger. The legislation will provide legal protection from abusive environments, and I urge you, the committee, to pass Bill H1882, the Psychological Safety at Work Act. Light beats darkness, positive beats negative, good beats evil. Thank you for your consideration.
My name is Rosa Parker, and I am here to wholeheartedly support House Bill 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I would like to see employers held accountable. We should not have to suffer in silence. We should not have to die for our livelihood. We should not have to be hunted in the workplace. We should not have to endure employers not protecting our safety in the workplace. I'm asking you to please vote for this bill, because you will be the representation for these employees that are suffering in silence in the workplace. I appreciate the time to bring to your attention that at one point in time in our U.S. history, there was a voice that stood up for spousal abuse, for child abuse, for domestic violence. I'm asking you to speak up with your voices against workplace bullying and harassment and protect our psychological safety. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. My name is Ekta Srinivasa, and I'm a registered nurse with 18 years of experience in various nursing care delivery settings. Currently, healthcare settings lack psychological safety, as evidenced by repeated strikes by nurses asking for a better work environment, high attrition rates, burnout, and poor health outcomes for our patient population. Despite rising healthcare costs for individual consumers and our country, we still fail to deliver better health outcome for the patients. Healthcare systems operating under a business model, fearful of litigations at every step, have resorted to creating a culture where the leaders design a system of silence, grant informal powers to everyone willing to show blind obedience, enabling a culture where cliques are formed and where hiding errors become easier. There's also a growing culture within the healthcare systems where sentinel events, including patient deaths, are being blamed on an individual caregiver to avoid systemic responsibility and lawsuits. Lack of psychological safety in healthcare cultivates a culture routinely generating poor patient care. There are several reasons for lack of psychological safety in healthcare. First one is obviously the ubiquity of workplace bullying. There is a causal relationship between workplace bullying and patient safety outcomes, such as higher rates of falls, more medical errors, and higher infection rates, to name just a few. Despite the evidence, employers have largely ignored the issues and failed to take meaningful steps to prevent, mitigate, and victims of workplace bullying. Second reason for lack of psych safety in healthcare is that the internal and external recourse systems are inefficacious, outdated, and need to be up to speed with the research on workplace bullying. This is similar to domestic abuse. When we had more evidence, the the actions taken by recourse processes became different. Although access is provided to file a complaint, the system does not evaluate the long-term equity and outcome of utilizing the recourse process. The lived experience of individuals who utilize the recourse process garners even more reprisal, retaliation, and mobbing, which involves expulsion. For example, 80% of EEO cases fail to meet the standards. Perhaps our system is overwhelmed, as it might be in this case. Only judge assigned to review EEO cases for the Boston area through her tenure from 2018 to 2023, it turns out that all cases brought in front of her, she dismissed it, not allowing it to go past the summary judgment. I have learned that cases related to workplace culture is usually considered the employer's responsibility. When our legal system
That's going to be very helpful if you can put that in writing.
I'm Tammy Enander. A few years ago, I contemplated suicide. Outside of my hospital, a sign read, "Heroes work here." Inside the hospital, I was standing in front of an Omnicell machine, deciding whether to bolus myself with potassium or insulin. Depressed, I had lost count of how many horrible COVID deaths I had witnessed. My back hurt from the injury I sustained from a panicking patient.
Excuse me, it's really hard to hear you,
Okay.
so close to the mic, speak.
Sure.
Even though it's testimony.
Sure. But depression and pain doesn't automatically drive someone to a death plan. What pushed me over the edge that day was the bullying I had endured from my manager. My manager told me she was short-staffed and needed me to pass medications. I felt guilty and decided to go in and be mindful of my work restrictions. But by 3 p.m., my back was stinging in pain, and I told my manager the work required me to perform outside of my orders and was unsafe, so I went home. Again, she assigned me the task, and when I said no for my own safety, she called saying that she spoke with HR, who said it was fine for me to work outside of those orders, and if I refused, I would lose my workers' comp benefits. So I emailed HR and my manager, asking what doctor they spoke with to clear me for that work. Within minutes, she withdrew her demands. But the next shift, the director of nursing presented me with several write-ups for absences backdated over a month for the days I called out and was admitted to the hospital for the work injuries. After that, my manager and director actively intimidated me at work. HR refused to help, and I realized I had no allies. I filed an OSHA complaint for retaliation. Then management was much more careful about how they bullied me. My manager put me in unsafe situations. She hovered over me, watching closely. She questioned my competence in front of patients. I dreaded every shift, I cried often, and I hardly slept. OSHA would take months to intervene, and I no longer had the mental battery or focus to advocate for myself, and I was giving up. I can't remember why I decided not to pull the medications and carry out my death plan, but after I did, I quit that job and started travel nursing until I had my son. Although I faced death daily, my mental health improved just enough to keep me safe after I left that environment. Now I work to help healthcare workers. The stories they tell me scare me for them. Nurses have a high risk for suicide. We're smart enough to know how to die efficiently. We have access to all of the supplies. We know exactly what to say, not to get Baker acted. And our mental health is assaulted nearly every shift. Hospitals have never treated us like heroes. They hardly treat us like humans. You will continue to hemorrhage healthcare workers unless you do something about this. So if you truly feel that healthcare workers are heroes, then your decision is easy today, and you will favor H 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Claire Himes. I'm a workplace bullying expert. I have written over 100 pages about workplace bullying in an essay published on my website, and I have a YouTube channel about workplace bullying with over 100 videos and over 1,400 subscribers. I am testifying in support of H 1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I am from Texas. I am 48 years old, and for over 30 years, I have been bullied. I have been bullied in almost every job I have ever had. I have been called every name in the book to my face, and I'm sure that pales in comparison to what bullies have said about me behind my back. I have been accused of things I did not do, and I have been stalked and physically assaulted by a former coworker. As a result of the abuse, I have resigned myself to a diminished, impoverished quality of life. In 30 years, I have managed to scrape together an average annual income of only about $20,000 and accumulated about $300,000 in debt. If it had not been for my family, I would have died decades ago. I've lived for decades with symptoms of PTSD, major depressive disorder, anxiety, eating disorders, alcoholism, pill abuse, self-mutilation, sleep disturbances, digestive problems, and to suicide attempts. It is now painfully clear to me that I will never find a job without bullying. Every year I remove something from my bucket list as I increasingly accept that my humble dreams will never materialize. I never asked for very much from this life, but I thought I at least had a basic human right to a job where I was left alone to work in peace. I guess I was wrong. The problem is that I am not unintelligent or a bad person. I have an above average IQ. I have 2 degrees. My skill set may not be spectacular, but I think I have at least something to contribute. Like a lot of targets of workplace bullying, I am smart, creative, and intuitive, with bright, original ideas for products and services that could be making all of our lives better as we speak, and yet the public is being denied what we have to offer. It has not been a good life, but when I die, I know I will die with my integrity, and with the knowledge that I am a better person than anyone who has ever bullied me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Abby Harper, and I implore you to support H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. What happened to me at work should not have been legal, not anywhere, not in the United States, and certainly not at a nonprofit mental health organization. In January 2022, I began work on the helpline at the National Eating Disorders Association, or NEDA. NEDA quickly celebrated my critical thinking and tasked me specifically with advocating for helpline needs. I saw the burnout and trauma we were sustaining was unsustainable. When NEDA failed to act, my coworkers and I collectively petitioned management for a psychologically safe workplace. The targeted retaliation began immediately. When I told them I saw the bullying for what it was, NEDA's full chain of command suddenly asserted that I was no longer a good fit. A baseless 2-week intensive probationary period began as a means to create just cause to fire me. This became an exercise in psychological abuse that dragged on for months, with constant supervision, humiliation, and bombardment with unending, negative, exaggerated, or patently false feedback. Had we not unionized, NEDA would have used this fallacious paper trail to fire me. I told them their tactics were triggering my previously disclosed ADHD. My supervisors continued to weaponize my disability against me. My whistleblower report reached the board of directors, and NEDA staged a sham investigation by the transnational law firm that later busted our union. The harassment continued. I had panic attacks before, during, and after work, unintentionally lost 15 pounds, sobbed myself to sleep at night, and I am still suffering from diagnosed PTSD. NEDA's egregious union busting and the chatbot spectacular failure made global headlines. Yet most of my abusers remain in positions of power today due to silencing employees who dared question them previously with NDAs. I will end by saying psychological safety is a basic human right. To quote Desmond Tutu, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. When you vote on the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, whose side will you choose?
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Sister Kadrian, and I'm here to support Bill H1882, Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I was a former employee at Northeastern University. I left a long-term job seeking the American dream for my family. I worked at Northeastern for 10.5 years in the sponsored research division. I became aware of the fact that there was a $20,000 salary disparity, so I began to speak up in hopes of amicably resolving the issue for 5 years. It didn't happen, so I filed a grievance with the Affirmative Action Office. It was one of 16 grievances, internal as well as external. As a result of filing the grievances, I was subjected to 200 acts of retaliation, which morphed into a hostile work environment. And ultimately, I was forced out of my job because I continued to speak up, but I continued to also be an exemplary employee. As a result of the hostile work environment, I became disabled. I'm disabled today. Also, my marriage suffered. My husband and I separated. In 2018, my husband died from opioid and alcohol abuse. Well, opioid and alcohol as a result of secondary trauma. He left behind 4 offspring, and they're suffering to this day. They're also suffering because of what I went through for the 9 or so years at Northeastern University. One of the things that happened was there was an African statue, the color of old blood, placed above my front office mailbox. It stated, to ward off evil spirits. I was also wrongfully accused of being a threat by my supervisor to him, his daughter, and everyone. However, when I went to his wife's funeral, no one in the family perceived me as a threat. They embraced me, and he even smiled. So I'm asking that you pass this legislation. I could go on. My husband also had to scramble to get insurance because our insurance was canceled, and he was getting treatment for cancer. Our 2 children were attending Northeastern University, had to scramble to figure out how to pay $40,000 per semester. So we definitely need, I consulted 40 attorneys. I had to walk away from my case at the First Circuit Court of Appeals in 2014 because I was so traumatized I could not prepare the brief, nor could I pay the $20,000 for the attorney. So I beg and plead with you, this is at least my 5th time at a hearing, to do something to hold abusive employers accountable. We are all essential workers, all of us. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
And thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Norman Quartermanch. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 1882. I am the spouse of a victim of workplace bullying and mobbing. I would like to see this legislation passed because I've seen the debilitating effects it had on a loved one firsthand. Over the course of several years, my wife was bullied and mobbed at a job she loved and did well. Why, you ask? Because there was jealousy and fear in the bully's eyes. Because of that, the bully attempted to do everything in her power to make my wife look bad. I wonder how you would feel if you watched your loved one go from being a vibrant, happy person who loved her job reduced to a puddle and a hot mess because of the bullying and mobbing. Think for a moment what you would do in that situation. I would try to do anything that would make my wife feel better, but things just deteriorated as time went on. Every morning when I watched her leave for work, I told her I loved her and not to let anything happen to her as she walked out the door with tears in her eyes. The depression was debilitating, but worse than that, she was diagnosed with PTSD. This is damage to your brain you get in wars. She got it going to work and doing her job. There are many sleepless and restless nights that came about because of the employees, but the employees need to be responsible for their actions of other employees and take it seriously when someone comes to them with complaints about abuse. With over 200 documented emails proving that this bullying was going on, she tried to do the right thing and go through the proper channels, but that only led to the institution to protect her themselves and do whatever they could to get rid of her. The institution is part of the state of Massachusetts higher education community. Not only do I think that the institution is responsible for their actions in that situation, I think the state of Massachusetts should also share some of that responsibility. This is where you come in. There needs to be dignity, and there needs to be a safe environment where people can work and do their jobs without being harassed, bullied, mobbed by an institution or a company they work for. Thank you for your
And thank
time.
you for your testimony.
My name is Ann. I live in Milton, Massachusetts. I was a teacher for 26 years, but I haven't taught in 12 years. At my old school, Desmond Tutu came. I remember meeting him. I think he would be sad about what happened at the school, with me in particular, with workplace mobbing. This is a phenomena that's been studied since the early 80s. The term workplace mobbing was coined by Heinz Lehmann, a psychiatrist in Sweden. It's a form of group bullying. It's eerily similar among anyone that experiences it. Unfortunately, it starts with a narcissistic bully who enlists unwitting participants to drive out someone in the workforce. it's, to me, not the problem of the bully, but the administration, and right now the American government, because a lot of other countries have already enlisted laws to prevent workplace mobbing and bullying. I believe it's England, for example. If you go into something the equivalent of like the EEOC or MCAD, and you claim that you have been bullied out of your job, they'll hold a tribunal as an outside entity, as the government, to look into this organization and find out how is somebody that got a $10,000 a year raise like myself, 12 months later fired from their job. Had I been still I have an invisible disability. It's known as the suicide disease, but I never let it bother my work. I left it at the door when I went into work, and I love my job. Had I continued working these last 12 years, I calculated I would have made about $200,000 tax money for income tax. Instead, this affected my heart, and it cost the government about $200,000, as I am now disabled from my illness and the repercussions of workplace mobbing. So I would recommend you make this phenomena illegal, like a lot of other nations, so that you can have workers who continue to contribute to our society, our taxes and whatnot. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Marisol Caballero, and I was a C-suite executive who was very well respected until I took medical leave. My medical note was read by my boss to some of my colleagues, and upon my return, I was ousted from all executive meetings. People stopped speaking to me, I was micromanaged, my reporting structure was changed, and suddenly my stellar professional record was tainted. Nothing I did was good enough. I often was told that I'm not doing enough for my salary, and I was threatened to get fired if I didn't change my performance. Important information was often kept from me, and secret meetings took place, leaving me in a place of uncertainty and wondering what was being plotted against me. Unattainable projects were given to me in an attempt to make me fail. I was isolated from all of my previous responsibilities, and my colleagues were told not to trust me. I suddenly became useless and invisible to them. This abusive psychological journey took a toll on me. I went from being a successful and confident professional to someone completely broken. I had many sleepless nights, extensive marital and family issues, lack of self-confidence, triggered PTSD, anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Twice I got into my car and almost got into an accident. I had to pull over due to the racing thoughts, the crying, the shaking, the fear, all triggered by my employer. Every day that I walked through those doors, I knew that it would be hell. I ended up walking away from my career, ended up losing my paycheck, but it was a hard choice, but I had to save my life, or my kids wouldn't have me. I'm still trying to pick up the pieces now. I still don't have work after 5 months, but I know that I will get this, I will be a survivor. Thank you for listening to me.
Hello, my name is Amber Cryer, and I am testifying in support of the H1882, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. I am an x-ray tech working every weekend by myself in hospital, and I am also a single Hispanic mom. Just like Martin Luther King, I also have a dream, one that we can all go to work free of bullying, abuse, harassment, intimidation, discrimination, and instead be judged on our own character, ethics, and quality of work. The abuse began in January 2021 after I formally asked for help on the weekends due to the amount of exams I was doing. The abuse escalated in May 2022 after I went up the chain of command to advocate for myself. I have been texted and made fun of for asking for help. I have been denied multiple requests to change shifts. I have been told my supervisor says she picked this shift, so she has to deal with it. My supervisor changed another tech to different hours and was told by someone in our department how wrong she was. She put her hand in that person's face and told them to stop. In April of this year, I was sexually assaulted by a soldier on the weekend while I was working by myself, and I was terrified to report due to my supervisor's abuse. After my abuser was removed from our department, the second tech that was on shift with me was removed from my shift, citing there aren't enough techs. After recently putting in an EEO complaint for harassment and discrimination, I was written up last week for insubordination due to a computer error. I now have severe asthma as a result of COVID that I acquired from the hospital, and instead of being helped, my supervisor went to HR to have them help them deny my reasonable accommodation. I even believe that she has falsified my workers' comp claim. Even though I have the most exams out of our entire department, my medical information was used as a reason why I was unsuccessful in my midpoint evaluation. I was denied the performance awards at the final evaluation. To all the survivors that have suffered through the injustice of relentless bullying and discrimination, eventually laws will be changed and we will be heard and recognized. One day we will be able to breathe at work again without feeling like we are suffocating, and I hope that day is soon. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Andrea Barnes. Workplace bullying starts with an organization that overlooks the way employees treat each other. Most workplace bullies probably have a diagnosable personality disorder with big egos and uncontrollable anger, but that's less relevant than the organizational structure that allows them to continue to abuse their power. I was a licensed psychologist and an attorney working for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 15 years, and I could not get out from under the abuse of my particular bully. I apologize. I sought the support of my union to file grievances, and I always prevailed on every grievance, but each one cost me 2 years of hearings and appeals and the emotional stress, and I prevailed, but my bully only doubled down his retaliation. I've spent about $10,000 consulting with lawyers trying to find a tort that I can sue over or something else, but there was no option. I would get the response that said litigation was prohibitively expensive and they would turn down the cases. I finally left the job to save my physical and mental health, but I earn about a third of what I used to earn, and I'm never going to recover from the financial losses. These bills are about abuse of power and raw aggression. The bully uses strategies that are predictable, and they're not even particularly clever, but they work. For me, it was a race with my bully to see who could get vested in 10 years, get out of the retirement system. And I know my time's up, so I'll stop now. Thank you.
My name is Delirious Montañez from Texas. I am a former 29 years honorable field grade Army officer and a 26-year law enforcement veteran at every level, the city, county, and federal. I want to see this specific piece of legislation passed because I myself have been a victim of the broken system in place within the two largest federal government agencies in the United States of America. I was purposely, intentionally, and systematically destroyed by several organizations for internal motives. I work in the public service industry with Customs and Border Protection, formerly known as the United States Border Patrol. The bullying, mobbing, and insults began back in 2012 when I incurred a work-related injury in the workplace after repeatedly asking my physicians to intervene, as several management officials at the station constantly displayed abuse of power, lack of empathy and compassion, and enforcement of the EEOC established laws. I experienced abuse based on race, nationality, sex discrimination, and retaliation for previous EEO activities, in addition to retaliation for protected disclosures made under the Whistleblower Protection Act. I endured this unwelcome, distasteful, and unprofessional type of treatment and behavior for a period of 9 years, until I was forced to retire after becoming a victim of a crime by one of the same management officials. I have filed my complaints again. The agency covered up the crime and obstructed justice with law enforcement agencies who had jurisdiction. I knew in my heart I was headed to the hospital or the cemetery. The tactics used were atrocious and non-stop, not limited to harassment, bullying, mobbing, personal attacks, insults, persecution, false accusations, administrative and criminal witch hunts, and cyber-stalking hate crimes. The physical, mental, and emotional abuse immensely impacted me to the point of aggravating a post-traumatic stress injury they were made aware of on numerous occasions via physician's documentation, and one was unreasonable accommodation since May 2019. According to my father, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act is passed into the legislature anonymously with flying colors. We together can save a life and fill the gaps of this broken system. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I want to show you a picture of me before. This is me after. I am a victim of workplace harassment and bullying, and I'm here for the House Bill 1882. I am speaking on behalf of all government employees that are slaves to corrupt practices and double standards in regards to policies, whistleblower within the entity. I've been fighting for 10 years. I am a victim of 2 times of people that were related and affiliated within up the chain of command to county commissioners, county managers, administration, management. I almost lost my life. I am a victim of domestic violence and child abuse, and I work for the Department of Family Services, Clark County in Nevada. And I endured severe abuse for speaking up. Believe it or not, for the most simplest things. I am not a troublemaker. I follow policy, but policy was violated by from the top down. They tell us to follow the chain of command, but they themselves violate their own policies and laws. They blocked my workplace harassment TPO. They went to a judge that worked for the county, and they violated the law by telling the judge to block my workplace harassment TPO. They got their attorneys involved. It was a whole big situation. Mind you, all these people that were against me ended up in the news for they themselves violating policy and laws. There's a double standard, and we have to keep fighting. And I want to send you my testimony because I had attorneys involved, I had witness accounts, and they overlooked everything and terminated me.
That would be really great if you could send it in, because many people's stories are much longer than 2 minutes. So I appreciate your sending it in.
So this is really near and dear to my heart because I have been a victim of workplace psychological abuse more than once. I was in the teaching field for my entire career, and I eventually last year just decided to leave the teaching field because of how prevalent this is. Just unreasonable expectations being placed on workers and being personally blamed and judged when you're inevitably not able to reach these high expectations. This started in 2012 at my very first public school teaching job. It was a level 3 school, so people were understandably concerned with MCAS scores, but everything became so narrow-mindedly toward that goal, and the principal was constantly berating me for any tiny thing I did, like playing classical music in the classroom, anything that I did that she personally didn't like. There was also a lot of cliquey type behavior among coworkers that the principal, kind of encouraged, because it was like, if you were in her in circle, then you would be treated well and given good reviews. And then following up to in another job later, I already had diagnosed PTSD from this previous job, and people were not willing to accommodate my very simple accommodations, such as meeting virtually instead of in person. And so I've eventually left the field. This bill is just so important. Thank you so much.
This is Sriram. I'm talking to you from Illinois. I've been a victim of workplace bullying and psychological abuse in the workplace. Basically, I do cancer research for my life, and I started this career with a passion. So I've been abused and bullied and so much in the work environment. So I have stand up for something which wasn't right. So since then I've been targeted and was written up for multiple times, and the retaliation was too much. I could not bear it, and it has a profound impact on my life. And now the family is separated, and I could not able to see my kid for a year because of that. All this issues started because of the workplace abuse environment, and once year back as a loving dad become a bad person for the kid right now. So all this happened because of the workplace toxic bullying, gaslighting environment with the bosses and the colleagues where I was working. So I'm trying to finish this on time, but I like to submit my testimony if that is possible.
I'm addressing these bills. These bills address a fundamental issue many workers, from healthcare workers to teachers, face daily: being verbally abused, gaslit, and marginalized at work. These interactions have a profound impact on the target's sense of self. Studies show that aside from physical illness associated with acute and chronic stress, Hollis in 2015 noted that the cost of these events when the individual could spend up to 3.9 hours per week bracing themselves for these exchanges that the bullying thrusts upon the target. This leads to decreased interaction, productivity of the target, and in their way to handle this, they engage in presentism, which means they come to work but they don't really work. Absenteeism both affect the overall cost of doing business. Bullying is one of the forms of aggression that the American Psychological Association notes. This form of aggression has a monumental impact on the individual, the family, and those who observe these exchanges. In my case, I was a manager of a small unit and disagreed with my supervisor about the discipline of one of my staff. I felt that he was being too extreme. My reward was to be transferred to another campus and demoted from manager to assistant nurse manager. I filed a complaint during this reassignment, which did not result in any action. During my tenure, I saw the misuse of time by an employee. I reported it to the manager of that department. I was told to write it up. I wrote it up. Shortly thereafter, I was relegated to a communal computer room. Again, I filed another complaint. This limbo continued for 9 months. It should be noted that this assignment was far below my training, and one that I viewed as punishment for doing the right thing and following policy. The investigation found that my treatment was inappropriate, but they did not return me to my position. The ongoing mental anguish profoundly impacted me, leading me to leave the profession of nursing after 50 years of service.